JetBlue is now the first airline to ever be penalized for delays. The Department of Transportation fined the company $2 million for chronic delays and, quote, unrealistic scheduling. The DOT says half of the money will go to customers affected by the disruptions. Joining me this morning is our 9 News legal expert, Whitney Traylor. Good morning.
Good morning.
This is interesting. Okay,
yeah.
So this penalty is the first of its kind. Why such a hefty penalty, $2 million?
Right. Well, I think there were a number of things. And so when we're talking about chronic delays, what we're saying is the DOT said, look, JetBlue knew that they were scheduling it improperly. They knew that they weren't going to be able to make these flights. And so chronic is defined as if you have 10 or more flights in a month, if half of those flights are more than 30 minutes late. And so they had these chronic issues. And so the reason for this big hit was over 18 months, it happened almost 300 times. And so JetBlue was responsible for the vast majority of these delays. They were also offered a chance to remedy it, and they didn't. And so that's why they got hit with this big fine. But it wasn't just a matter of one off here, one off there. This was like, they were checking them for over 10 months.
They knew what they were doing with the unrealistic
Yes.
scheduling. That makes sense. So the airline industry as a whole was on your top 9 cases to watch in 2024, which we talked about.
Yeah.
So is this penalty against JetBlue just a continuation of problems
Yeah.
within the airline industry as a whole?
I think so. I mean, the airline industry has just been a mess. And we were talking earlier, I just give my hat off to Pete Buttigieg. He's done such a good job in terms of going after these airlines. And so as I was preparing my notes, I was pulling up all the other notes of cases I dealt with dealing with aviation. There's been so many cases. I mean, there's just so many fines. And so now we have the Passenger Bill of Rights. And so, I mean, the good thing, especially with this DOT, is they have really went after the airlines. They're holding their feet to the fire, and they expect other airlines actually to be fined for this very same thing in upcoming months.
What I think is interesting about this is this was an actual settlement that was agreed upon with JetBlue. What is JetBlue saying about why it agreed to this settlement? Are they acknowledging wrongdoing here?
Not really.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because I read a lot of information on this, and the DOT and others are all calling it a fine and penalty. But it was JetBlue, their CEO, who said, well, this was a settlement, meaning, they agreed to it. So maybe it was a settlement where they said, all right, you're going to get fined this $2 million. And they said, all right, we don't have a choice. And, JetBlue is saying that they're blaming the government. They're saying they need more air traffic controllers. They're saying those kind of things. But the reality is, and I believe that is true.
Right.
And I think they're trying to put a push on this new administration coming in to try and get some of those resources and things like that. But the reality is JetBlue stood out in terms of this wrongdoing. So, yeah, is it all their fault? Maybe not. But on the chronic piece, yeah, I think that is probably primarily them.
So I know what folks at home are thinking. They're thinking, wait a second, do we get any of this money?
Yeah.
$1 million is set aside for any JetBlue passengers from the last year or so, right?
Yeah. So it's a $2 million penalty. So $1 million goes into the U.S. Treasury, and then another $1 million goes to passengers who were harmed or who suffered these chronic delays, and most of them were out of JFK going to places like North Carolina and other East Coast. So I don't know if a lot of Denver folks will get that, but they're also putting some of that money to future passengers. So if there's more than a 3-hour delay, they'll get a minimum of a $75 voucher.
All right, so how do people claim money if they're like, I was on one of these flights?
Yeah, well, they should have already been contacted by either the DOT or JetBlue. But if not, you can definitely go to the Office of Aviation Consumer Protection. There's the site right there. And it's very user-friendly. You go there and they have these big boxes. You just start there and you can file your complaint and put your money in.
This is so great because I feel like if you've ever, flown before, you kind of feel like you don't really have a choice. If they're delayed, if you sit on the tarmac for hours, it is what it is. But now that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, over the past several years, and I'm going to put in this administration, this DOT has really been effective in terms of getting consumers' rights. So if there's a delay on the tarmac, they have to let you out to stretch your legs. They have to provide food. If there's a delay for longer than a certain amount of time, you get an automatic refund. If your bags are delayed for a certain amount of time, there's fines and refunds as well. So after 9/11, travel became really quite difficult.
Yeah.
And it still is in many ways, but at least now we have a lot more protections.
Yeah, no one wants any of that to happen, by the way. We just want to get there on time with our bags and everything. But now
Yes.
there's accountability if something
Yeah,
happens.
for sure.
Whitney, thank you so much.
All right, good
Chris?
to be here.